welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a figure who looms incredibly large in history, Alexander the Great. But we want to go beyond just the battles.
Absolutely.
Our mission here is to really dig into two big things. First, the huge cultural shift he kicked off, what we now call the Hellenistic Age. And second, this fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
How could someone build such a massive, seemingly absolute empire only for it to basically shatter the moment he died?
It's one of the great historical puzzles, isn't it? Maybe the most successful conquest leading to the fastest political collapse, certainly in the ancient world.
So where do we start?
I think we have to start with the person who really framed how we've thought about Alexander for, well, over a century. The German historian Johann Gustav Droysen.
Ah, yes, the famous quote.
Exactly. The name of Alexander marks the end of one age of the world, the beginning of another. That single line really sets the terms of the debate.
And Droysen wrote his big work, Geschichte des Hellenismus, back in 1877. Context is key here, right?
It's absolutely crucial. Think about it. 1877, Germany has just unified. It's asserting itself as a major power. Droysen is writing history through that specific nationalist lens.
So he saw Alexander as, what, a kind of historical precedent?
Pretty much. This idea of an enlightened autocrat, someone destined to conquer and crucially civilize the known world that really resonated in 19th century Germany. Alexander became a sort of conceptual model for benevolent, strong, centralized rule.
Like the Prussian leadership, perhaps.
Precisely. It helped justify that model. And even though modern scholars are, very critical of Droysen's biases and his determinism,
Right.
that basic framework that Alexander ushered in a completely new era is still incredibly influential. It's hard to shake off.
Okay, let's unpack that term he popularized.
Yeah.
The Hellenistic Age. Because before Droysen, Hellenismus meant something quite different, didn't it?
Entirely different. It was a technical term mostly used by philologists, language experts. It described the Koine, the common Greek dialect spoken by non-Greeks around the Eastern Mediterranean after Alexander's conquests. It was just about language spread.
But Droysen took that narrow linguistic term
And blew it up. He used it to define a whole historical epoch. Everything from Alexander right up until Rome really takes over the Mediterranean. Hundreds of years.
And the engine driving this new epoch, in his view, was this idea of Verschmelzung, fusion.
Fusion, exactly. A deliberate blending of East and West, orchestrated from the top by Alexander's monarchy.
What did that fusion look like? Was it just about mixing people?
It was partly administrative, sure. You see Iranians gradually used in the bureaucracy, the need for interpreters everywhere. But for Droysen, the really crucial world-changing aspect was religious syncretism.
Okay, tell us more about that. How did religion fit into this fusion idea?
Droysen argued that by bringing all these different cultures and their gods together under one rule, people started to see their local divinities as maybe related, as different faces of the same underlying divine reality.
Ah, so like seeing Zeus and Ammon as aspects of the same thing.
Exactly like that. And he believed this massive mixing process created a sort of general tendency towards monotheism, a predisposition for thinking about one god.
Which, if you follow that logic,
leads almost inevitably, in Droysen's view, to the spread of Christianity. Alexander's conquests become the necessary groundwork for the Christian message.
So Rome just becomes a sort of middleman.
Basically an irrelevancy in this grand scheme. Rome didn't create the right cultural conditions. It just inherited and spread the Greek culture Alexander had already planted. For Droysen, the real endpoint wasn't the Roman Empire, it was Jesus.
Wow. Okay, that definitely explains why modern historians are so cautious with Droysen. That's a very specific theological way of reading history.
It absolutely is. It's heavily influenced by Hegelian philosophy, this idea of history moving purposefully towards a specific goal, in this case, a sort of Christian Western endpoint. And Alexander is the world historical individual needed to push it along. That kind of religious determinism just isn't how most historians operate today.
And using that single label, Hellenistic Age, for such a long and diverse period, it must smooth over a lot of bumps, right?
It really does. It risks ignoring important continuities from before Alexander. And critically, it kind of downplays the very real backlash against Alexander's fusion policies that happened almost immediately after he died. It wasn't a smooth blend at all.
Plus, there are the biases within Droysen's work itself.
Yes, definitely. His descriptions of Eastern peoples under Persian rule can be quite dismissive, painting them as backward. And he tends to portray 4th century Athens as declining, which conveniently elevates the Macedonians and, by extension, the Germans of his own time.
Right. Making his own culture look like the rightful inheritors.
Exactly. We always have to remember who is writing the history and for whom. It's never truly objective.
Okay, let's shift from the framework to the man himself, Alexander. There's this whole romantic tradition in the West about his relationship with Aristotle, his tutor.
Ah, yes, the philosopher and the king. It's a compelling image. Alexander carrying his copy of Homer, the supposed letters exchanged, things like the secret of secrets.
But the reality.
Much less dramatic, much less influential than we like to think. The hard fact is, Aristotle never wrote a single surviving word about Alexander.
Really, nothing.
Nothing that's come down to us. We know the tutoring happened, mainly when Alexander was a teenager, maybe starting around 13 at Mieza, but that's about the extent of the documented contact.
Though Alexander did seem to value it early on. There's that quote.
Right. He supposedly said Philip gave them life, but Aristotle taught him how to live well, which shows, respect for the education he received. But the real test is Alexander's actions later in life.
And that's where the disconnect becomes really stark.
Glaringly obvious. Think about Aristotle's core philosophy versus Alexander's entire career.
Right. Aristotle idealized the small, self-sufficient city-state, the polis, something manageable where citizens knew each other.
Exactly. Politics, the 7.5 estate, should be bigger than what you can basically see in one go. Alexander. He built a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire, stretching thousands of miles, founding huge cities. The complete opposite.
And what about war? Alexander's whole life was campaigning.
Another direct conflict. Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, is very clear. War can't be the telos, the ultimate goal or purpose of life. It's only a means to achieve peace and leisure, the conditions needed for philosophy and living well.
Whereas for Alexander, conquest seemed to be the end in itself.
It certainly looks that way. Ceaseless war. And then there's that subtle line from Aristotle.
The potential jab at his former student.
Yeah, I think most scholars read it that way. In the Ethics X.7, Aristotle notes that it is possible to perform noble acts without being ruler of land and sea.
Ouch, given who the biggest ruler of land and sea was at the time.
Exactly. Feels like a pointed comment. True goodness doesn't require world domination, Alex.
And this philosophical gap wasn't just theoretical. It seems to have led to real tension later on.
Definitely. The relationship cooled considerably. As Alexander adopted more Persian customs, became more autocratic, he started viewing Aristotle with, well, suspicion.
Though he never actually harmed Aristotle himself.
No, not directly. But his hostility became crystal clear with the whole Callisthenes affair.
Callisthenes, Aristotle's great-nephew, the official historian on the campaign.
That's the one. Callisthenes was outspoken against Alexander, adopting Persian practices like proskynesis, the bowing or prostration, and the whole move towards divine kingship.
And he got caught up in a conspiracy plot.
Yes, the conspiracy of Hermolaeus and the pages. Callisthenes was implicated, arrested. Alexander's reaction is chilling. He wrote back, and this is recorded, saying Callisthenes would be punished personally by him, and adding he wouldn't forget those who sent Callisthenes out or who sheltered plotters.
A direct threat aimed back at Aristotle and Athens.
Absolutely. A very thinly veiled threat. Callisthenes died shortly after, either executed in chains or from disease, the accounts vary. But his fate sent a clear message. Intellectual dissent was no longer tolerated.
It really shows that shift, doesn't it? From the promising student to a ruthless, suspicious monarch.
The transformation seems complete by that point.
Let's talk about Alexander's persona, because he seemed convinced of his own special destiny almost from birth, back in 356 BC.
Well, the circumstances of his birth were certainly dramatic. The story goes that on the very same day, his father Philip received news of 3 victories.
3. What were they?
Parmenio defeating the Illyrians in battle, Philip's own racehorse winning at the Olympic Games, and then the news of Alexander's birth itself.
So the soothsayers had a field day.
You bet. A son born amidst 3 victories. He must be invincible. And then there was the other big omen.
The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus burning down on the same day.
Right, one of the 700s of the ancient world. The Magi reportedly interpreted it not as a disaster for Greece, but as a sign that a great destroyer of Asia had been born. Talk about setting expectations high.
His physical appearance also added to the mystique, didn't it?
The sources make a point of it. Fair-skinned, but with a ruddy or flushed look, especially on his face and chest. And then there's that very strange detail about him having a peculiar fragrance.
A fragrance?
Yes, supposedly pleasant, that clung to his clothes, attributed by Plutarch to his body's unique elemental balance, being hot and dry. Whether true or legend, it adds to the larger-than-life image.
And he controlled that image carefully, like with his portraits.
Very carefully. He only allowed one sculptor, Lysippus, to create his official likeness. Lysippus captured those famous features. The slight tilt of the neck, the intense, melting look in his eyes, it was all part of crafting the Alexander brand, you could say.
But the real game changer for his status came in Egypt at the Oracle of Ammon.
Siwa. Winter of 332 BC. He makes this difficult trek into the desert. Officially, he asks the oracle if his so-called father-Philish murderers have all been punished. A political question.
But he gets a much bigger answer.
Much bigger. The high priest greets him, perhaps accidentally, perhaps deliberately, as, "Oh, Pe Dios, oh, son of Zeus."
And Alexander runs with it.
Absolutely delighted. This wasn't just flattery. It was theological dynamite. It gave him a divine mandate, a level of authority far beyond a traditional Macedonian king, especially useful for ruling diverse peoples.
And we see him pushing this divine status, even applying it to his closest friend, Hephaestion, after his death.
Yes, that's a key moment. Alexander actively sought and received sanction from the oracle at Siwa to grant Hephaestion heroic honors after he died. He then promoted Hephaestion's cult across the empire.
So actual shrines were set up.
We have evidence. Shrines in Egypt, mentions in Macedonia. There were even debates in Athens about giving Alexander himself divine honors, maybe even making him the 13th Olympian god. That was controversial, but the fact it was even discussed shows how far things had shifted.
Okay, moving into the campaigns that made all this possible. When Alexander first crossed into Asia, his resources were, well, pretty thin, weren't they?
Shockingly thin. The low estimates put his army at maybe 30,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and money. Aristobulus says he had only 70 talents for supplies.
70 talents. That wouldn't last long.
Barely a month's worth. One Secretus even claims Alexander was already 200 talents in debt. Remember the story. He'd apparently given away almost all the royal estates and revenues to his friends before leaving.
Keeping only his hopes.
Exactly. Which meant he had to win, and win quickly. There was no fallback plan.
Which explains his actions at the Granicus River, his first major battle against the Persians. He ignored his most experienced general.
Parmenio, yeah. Parmenio looked at the situation, steep banks, fast river, Persians holding the high ground, and said, "Wait until morning." Sound tactical advice.
But Alexander wasn't having it.
Not at all. He plunged straight into the river with the cavalry, supposedly shouting that the Hellespont would blush for shame if he hesitated now after crossing it. Immensely risky. Almost reckless.
But it worked. It broke the Persian line.
It did. It showed his absolute commitment and maybe shocked the Persians. Once he was established in Asia Minor, the Persian king, Darius III, started trying to negotiate. 3 times, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3 distinct offers, each one bigger than the last.
The first one, after the Battle of Aetius, was relatively minor. Basically, release my family, maybe some ransom, go home. Alexander refused point blank. Demanded surrender.
Then came the second offer, after he'd taken Tyre. Much more serious.
Much more. Darius offered his daughter Statera II in marriage all the territory west of the Halys River, basically the western half of modern Turkey, a formal treaty of friendship, and a huge ransom.
Still not enough for Alexander.
Nope. He already saw himself as the rightful king of all Asia. Dividing it wasn't an option.
So the final offer was the big one. Darius practically offered to split the empire.
After Alexander took Egypt and was heading for Mesopotamia, Darius offered everything west of the Euphrates River, co-rulership of the entire Achaemenid Empire, another daughter in marriage, and an absolutely massive sum, 30,000 talents of silver.
That must have given him pause. That's a deal that could actually secure peace.
He did discuss it with his commanders, his companions. And that's where we get that famous exchange with Parmenio.
The pragmatic old general.
Parmenio apparently said, "If I were Alexander, I would accept this offer."
And Alexander's reply.
"So would I if I were Parmenio."
Oof. Brutal, but clear.
Absolute clear. His ambition wasn't partnership, it was total conquest. He told Darius there could only be one king in Asia, and Darius needed to surrender or fight.
Which made the next battle, Gaugamela in 331 BC, the decisive one. Darius threw everything he had left into it.
Everything. Huge numbers, probably outnumbered Alexander more than 2 to 1. War elephants, the best cavalry from the east, Scythians. And he specifically chose and leveled a wide plain to maximize his advantages, especially for his scythed chariots.
Parmenio, again, advised caution, a night attack.
Yeah, worried about the sheer numbers, he suggested attacking at night to cause confusion and hide their disadvantage.
But Alexander wanted a clear victory.
Famously replied, "I will not steal my victory." He wanted Darius defeated in broad daylight, fully aware of who had beaten him.
The battle itself was complex, but the key was Alexander's charge on the right wing.
Right, leading the companion cavalry.
Yep.
It eventually broke Darius's center, and Darius himself fled the field, left his chariot, his weapons, even his royal diadem behind.
But meanwhile, Parmenio on the left wing was in trouble.
Yes, the Macedonian left was under heavy pressure, and Parmenio sent urgent messages asking for Alexander's help.
But Alexander made a crucial decision.
He did. He prioritized chasing Darius over relieving Parmenio immediately. His logic, reportedly, was that defeating the king was defeating the empire. He apparently said something like, "The victors will always take possession of their enemy's baggage anyway."
Capture the king, the rest follows.
That was the political calculation. And he pursued Darius relentlessly after that.
Though Darius wasn't captured alive.
No. Months later, he was betrayed and murdered by one of his own satraps, Bessus. Alexander actually seemed genuinely saddened by this.
He respected Darius as a king.
It seemed so. He gave Darius a full royal burial at Persepolis. But then, crucially, Alexander presented himself as Darius's legitimate successor. He hunted down Bessus and had him executed as a regicide, a usurper. It cemented his own claim to the Persian throne.
Which brings us to Persepolis itself and the controversial burning of the palace complex. Intentional policy or drunken mistake?
That's still debated. The more romantic story, the one Plutarch gives us, involves Thais, an Athenian courtesan traveling with the army.
Right, the drunken party theory.
Exactly. At a celebration, she supposedly riled everyone up, saying they should burn Persepolis as revenge for Xerxes burning Athens 150 years earlier. Alexander, caught up in the moment, supposedly led the way, but then regretted it and ordered the fire put out.
But there's another interpretation.
The colder, more calculated view is that it was deliberate policy. Persepolis was the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid dynasty. Destroying it sent an unmistakable message. The old empire is finished, there's no rallying point for resistance, Alexander is now in charge.
How do we weigh these?
It's tough. The policy argument makes strategic sense, especially since Alexander needed to consolidate power. But the Thais story fits with other accounts of Alexander's impulsiveness, especially when drinking. Maybe it was a bit of both. A drunken impulse that served a political purpose.
That volatility seems key as we move into the next phase. His attempts to actually consolidate this massive empire. The paradox of fusion.
Right, he's trying to integrate East and West, but his methods often created more friction, especially with his own Macedonians.
The mass marriage at Susa in 324 BC is the prime example, isn't it?
Definitely the most dramatic. Alexander himself married two high-ranking Persian princesses, Darius's daughter Statera and another royal, Parysatis. And then he had about 90 of his top officers, his companions, married daughters of Iranian nobility, all at the same time.
Was this the revolutionary cultural fusion Joyson talked about?
Well, the scale was unprecedented, but the idea wasn't entirely new for Macedonians. We have to remember his father, Philip II.
Philip had multiple wives, didn't he? For political reasons.
Loads of them. It was standard Argead dynasty practice, marry the daughters of potential rivals or allies to cement power. So, in a way, Alexander was just doing traditional Macedonian consolidation, but on an imperial scale.
But his Macedonian officers didn't like it one bit.
Hated it. Deeply resented being forced to marry barbarian women. And the proof is what happened after Alexander died.
They ditched the wives.
Many of them did almost immediately. The successors went back to marrying among the Macedonian elite. It shows the fusion was pretty superficial, more about Alexander's will than genuine integration.
He also tried to bridge the gap with his own clothing choices.
Yeah, adopting a kind of hybrid Persian median dress. He was careful at first, avoiding the most outlandish median robes, maybe just wearing it privately, but gradually he wore it more publicly.
And the Macedonians
Grumbled intensely. They saw it as going native, betraying their simpler, more martial traditions. They only put up with it because it was Alexander, his charisma. His battlefield record earned him that leeway.
But the resentment was building.
Definitely simmering. And it really boiled over with his military policies, especially introducing the epigonoi.
The successors, or heirs, who were they exactly?
Around 30,000 young Iranians, drafted and trained from adolescence in Macedonian tactics, weapons, and even the Greek language. They learned the phalanx drill. By 324 BC, they arrived in Susa, fully trained.
And Alexander's plan for them.
It seems pretty clear they were meant to supplement his aging Macedonian veterans, but also possibly to act as a counterweight to them. A force loyal only to him, not tied to the old Macedonian ways.
Which leads directly to the mutiny at Opis.
A huge crisis. Alexander announced he was discharging the older, unfit Macedonian veterans, sending them home with honors. But the rest of the army took it as a sign he was replacing them, favoring his new Persian troops.
They felt discarded.
Exactly. There was uproar. Alexander reacted furiously. He executed the ringleaders, then shut himself away, refusing to see the Macedonians, pointedly using only his Persian guards and commanders.
Standoff.
Total standoff. Then he emerged and gave this incredibly dramatic speech, listing everything he and his father had done for them, and threatened to replace them entirely with Persian units, even giving Persian commanders Macedonian titles.
How did the Macedonians react to the Epigonoi specifically?
With contempt. They apparently mocked them as war dancers, basically saying they were parade ground soldiers, not real fighters. And maybe they had a point later. In the successor wars, veteran Macedonian units like the Silver Shields proved far superior in battle.
This whole period feels like paranoia was increasing alongside these fusion policies, the purges of commanders.
Yes, Alexander became much more ruthless in removing potential threats, especially figures associated with his father's reign. Governors who seemed disloyal were purged, often replaced by lower-ranking Macedonians loyal only to him.
The most famous case being Parmenion.
The elimination of Parmenion, Philip's most trusted general, was brutal. After his son, Philotas, was accused and executed for conspiracy, maybe trumped-up charges, Alexander sent assassins to kill Parmenion immediately.
Before Parmenion even knew his son was dead.
Exactly, to prevent any possibility of Parmenion leading a revolt out of grief or anger. It was pure political calculation.
And then there's the horrifying incident with Cleitos the Black.
That's maybe the starkest example of Alexander's temper and the dangers of his court. Cleitos was a senior cavalry commander, a man who had actually saved Alexander's life at the Granicus.
What happened?
At a banquet, likely lots of wine involved, Cleitos started criticizing Alexander, objecting to the increasing Persian customs, the flattery, maybe suggesting Alexander was disrespecting his father Philip's memory.
Things got heated.
Extremely heated. Alexander, in a drunken rage, grabbed a spear from a guard and ran Cleitos through, killing him on the spot.
Instant regret, though.
Apparently profound, immediate regret. Reports say he tried to kill himself with the same spear right afterwards. He'd murdered a loyal friend and veteran in a fit of temper. It must have terrified the remaining commanders. Nobody was safe.
Let's turn to another legacy. The cities. Alexander founded dozens, maybe over 70, across Asia. Plutarch praised this as a great civilizing act.
His reputation as a city founder was immense, almost equal to his military fame. But we need to look closer at what these cities actually were, especially at first.
Not exactly bustling centers of philosophy from day one.
Probably not. Again, look at his father, Philip. He founded cities too, like Philippopolis. Locals apparently nicknamed it Poneropolis Crook City.
Suggests the quality of the first settlers wasn't always top tier.
Exactly. Many of Alexander's settlers were likely reluctant colonists, discharged soldiers, mercenaries, maybe people who didn't have much choice. Their main function initially was military. Garrison key points, control trade routes, keep an eye on the locals.
But Greek culture did take root in these places eventually, didn't it? Even in remote areas.
It absolutely did, which is remarkable. It seems the Greek and Macedonian settlers, far from home, recreated their own culture. The best example is Iconium, way out in modern Afghanistan.
What did archaeologists find there?
Incredible things. A proper Greek theater, a gymnasium for exercise and education, administrative buildings, Greek-style houses, and most amazingly, fragments of Greek philosophical texts, including part of a sophisticated treatise on metaphysics.
Metaphysics? In Afghanistan?
It shows the settlers brought their high culture with them. They weren't necessarily fusing deeply with the local Bactrian culture, but they were definitely projecting and maintaining their own Hellenic way of life, even on the very fringes of the known world.
Which brings us, finally, to the end. Babylon, 323 BC, Alexander's death, and the immediate implosion of everything he built.
It was swift. He fell ill. A fever that lasted days. The sources are full of bad omens around that time.
Like the man found sitting on his throne.
Yes, some random person just sitting silently on the throne, wearing Alexander's diadem. Deeply disturbing. And a story about a tame donkey killing a lion in his menagerie. And then the priests of the god Serapis advising that Alexander should just be left undisturbed where he lay ill.
And when he died, the power structure he embodied just vanished.
Instantly. While alive, he controlled this unprecedented combination. The veteran Macedonian army, the vast wealth of the Persian Empire, naval power, manpower. It was irresistible. The moment he died, that unified power evaporated.
Chaos ensued.
Almost immediate civil war between the infantry and the cavalry over the succession. Perdiccas, one of the top generals, tried to hold things together as regent, but it was a struggle from day one. And crucially, the Diadochi, the successors, started reversing his core policies.
Like the policy of keeping the satraps, the regional governors, relatively weak?
Exactly. Alexander tried to maintain central control. The successors saw their satrapies as personal rewards, their own power bases. Antipatros took the royal heirs back to Macedonia in 319 BC, and they never returned to Asia. Central control was gone.
The satrapies became kingdoms in waiting.
Pretty much, they became hereditary holdings. You see figures like Seleucus or Ptolemy fighting fiercely to defend their own territory against other successors like Antigonus. The grand imperial vision was replaced by regional ambition.
And the focus shifted from expansion to just holding on.
Absolutely. The very first campaign after Alexander died, Perdiccas attacking Arirathes in Cappadocia, wasn't about conquering new lands. It was about putting down a rebellion, consolidation, containment. The era of relentless expansion was over.
And the most striking example of this contraction is what happened in the East with India.
That deal between Seleucus I and the Mauryan king Chandragupta around 305 BC. It's incredibly telling. Seleucus basically traded away Alexander's easternmost conquests, huge territories in modern Afghanistan and Pakistan.
For what?
For 500 war elephants.
Trading land for elephants.
Yes. Think about it. He needed those elephants immediately for his wars against the other successors in the West. He was willing to give up vast territories, lands Alexander bled to conquer, for a short-term military advantage. It shows how vulnerable these new dynasties felt, how limited their resources were compared to Alexander's unified empire, something unthinkable under Alexander or even the Persians before him.
It's interesting, too, how the kind of kingship evolved differently in the successor states.
Very different trajectories. In Egypt, the Ptolemies, and in Asia, the Seleucids, they generally adopted a very Hellenistic style of monarchy. Elaborate courts, ruler cults, presenting the king as a distant, almost divine figure. Absolute monarchy.
But back in Macedonia itself,
They stuck much closer to the old ways. Macedonia was the only successor state that really maintained what scholars call archaic perceptions of kingship.
meaning
The Macedonian king was traditionally seen as a first among equals, a warrior leader ruling with the consent of the aristocracy. So the king of Macedonia was never deified like the Ptolemies or Seleucids were. And that Persian custom Alexander tried to introduce, proskynesis,
the bowing and scraping.
it never took hold in Macedonia. They went back to a more direct, casual relationship between the king and the nobles, a clear rejection of Alexander's autocratic, easternized model.
So to sum up this whole deep dive, Alexander is this incredible paradox. He consciously creates this new Hellenistic world, spreads Greek culture far and wide.
But the very empire he builds through sheer force of will is completely dependent on him personally. His genius was in conquest and power accumulation, not in building durable institutions.
The structure was brittle. It shattered on impact when he died.
Exactly. Charisma and conquest couldn't substitute for a stable political system or a clear succession plan.
Which leads us to a final, perhaps sobering thought for you, our listeners. That relentless drive, that passion Alexander had, it didn't just consume his enemies, it consumed his own army.
Think about the incredible hardships those Macedonian soldiers endured. Not just battles, but disease, horrific heat, starvation marches, that disastrous trek back from India through the Gadrosian Desert.
Plutarch's figures are shocking.
He suggests Alexander lost maybe 3/4 of his entire force, men, women, animals, on that one march. Thousands upon thousands dead, arguably for no good military reason, just Alexander's pride and his desire to conquer even the landscape, the seasons.
So consider this. Alexander's defining characteristics, that relentless spirit, that absolute refusal to accept limits, his pathos or longing for the unknown, the very things that enabled him to conquer the world.
Were also perhaps devastatingly costly, even suicidal, for the very men who made those conquests possible. Can that kind of glory, bought at such a human price by your own followers, truly be called noble?
Something to think about. The architect of a new world, and perhaps the architect of its immediate collapse. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.